For many cookbook authors, once our first book is out in the world, we forget much of the work and pain that went into making it. Today, we're talking to someone who's in the thick of it. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. This is Molly Stevens, and I am here with Kate Leahy and Kristin Donnelly. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
So today is a little different. We're changing things up. I was thinking as we're preparing, we don't have a book to look at.
Right.
We are going to be talking to Martin Sorge. I think we all know him. He's left listener comments. He loves Everything Cookbooks, says he's listened to every episode, some of them many times over. Martin is from the Midwest. He had a career in economic development, and he was an avid home baker that then went on to compete and win the Great American Baking Show.
Yeah, and I'm so curious to talk with him about how he was able to use that as a springboard for his cookbook ambitions. He had pitched us a couple of years ago about how he has always wanted to write a cookbook. He thought maybe he would self-publish one, but then he's kind of worked his way through our back catalog to figure out how to get a cookbook deal. He met his agent, who was one of our guests on the show, friend of the podcast, Sally Eckes. Kristin and Molly, we were talking before recording about how we're so impressed by someone who takes advice and does the follow through, because It's easy to ask for advice. It's really hard to take the advice and then work from it.
Yeah.
But he's kind of done all the right things.
Yeah. And he's also really good at follow up, which we have seen because he pitched us saying like, hey, would you want to talk with an author at the beginning of their journey and like checking in? It was a really fun idea. It just wasn't one that we necessarily were able to execute, but I think he followed up, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like a year later.
Right. He got a rejection, but didn't take it as a never again. He followed up, and here we are 2 years later having him on a guest of the show. It's exciting, and I understand he's just turned in the manuscript for his first cookbook. Mm-hmm. Which will be coming out in the fall of 2026. So I don't know if you follow him. I follow him on Instagram and check out his Substack. And so I've been following his progress a little bit.
Right. Because there's so much that you forget about the process after a year goes on,
right?
And then the book comes out. You kind of like some of the lessons you learned, they're sort of vague in the background, or some of the pain points they've kind of softened.
Yeah.
But he's right in the thick of things. So things will be really fresh in his memory of what he's going through and what he's learned.
It hasn't been that long since he, went from being a home baker who liked to come up with his own recipes with this idea of a cookbook, and now he's got a cookbook in the works. So It can be done.
Yeah, it's impressive.
It's very impressive. So let's bring on Martin. Well, Martin, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
I couldn't be more excited to be here.
It's really fun to have you on. I mean, friend of the pod, for sure. Been following your journey. So let's just talk about your journey. You signed with your agent in 2023, Sally Eckes, right?
I did.
And the book is going to be out in the fall of 2026.
Correct.
So has this felt like a short amount of time or a long amount of time?
It's a little bit of both. My journey started even a lot longer before that. So I filmed the Great American Baking Show, which I was on in the summer of 2022. So I knew the outcome of that late in the summer. And at that point, we didn't know when the show was going to come out. I had thought the year before about putting together a little self-published booklet of 24 recipes I have that I always email to my family and friends. And I was like, oh, I'll put that together in a little booklet because I love writing them. I loved writing those recipes down, especially during the pandemic. And I thought about that. Then after the show, after filming the show, I thought, maybe I could turn this into something else. So that's when I actually started listening to your podcast religiously. I'd had Diane Jacobs' book, We'll Write for Food, for many years. And I'd read it, never had a blog, never tried to write anything, but I'd read the book.
And you had a day job at this point.
Yes, I worked full-time for the local government here in Chicago. Diane had an online cookbook proposal writing class that September or October, and I thought, I should take this. And had a really great time working with her through that, because she coaches you through building a proposal and talks about everything you need. And she really had really great feedback about my writing voice, which I was surprised to hear because I didn't think I had anything to say or any particular voice, but I just tried to be myself. But she said, you really need to build your platform. You don't have any platform. And she kept kind of hounding me on that. And I said, well, I have something in the works, but I can't. I DM'd her and I said, I can't tell you about it.
Oh.
So then I finished my proposal in the next like 6 months. And then by the time the show came out in May 2023, I had a proposal done. I had some agents that I knew I wanted to send queries to, including Sally. I think I queried 4 agents with the full proposal. I used the guidelines on Sally's website so that I make sure I was following her rules. And then I had a couple rejections, one really nice one who said, "You'll definitely find somebody." And so that was really inspiring. And then Sally and one other agent talked to me. And then I really vibed with Sally. I liked her transparency of how she's really open about the publishing industry. And so she agreed to work with me, author with a small platform. And I was thrilled to sign with her and start that journey. So that felt like a long time. Like that was almost a year between filming the show, starting working on the proposal, and then just signing with Sally. And then there was another year or so of refining the proposal, me trying to build my platform. Sally really helped me think about how to build that platform across a whole number of ways, whether social media or newsletter or pitching media. A little more than a year ago, we signed the deal with Agate, my publisher. So that, even getting to that point felt like a long time. But then the past year since I've been working on the book, that felt really fast.
That felt really fast.
Yeah, I can see that. We were talking before this episode, just remarking on like, wow, you're really following the rules in a sense, in the best way. Like all the advice that everybody gives, you're doing it. First of all, I guess kudos to you.
Thank you.
It's interesting to me that Sally kind of talked to you about building that platform. Tell us about your experience doing that, because I know following the rules is not easy. It's like simple, but it's not easy.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's simple easier because these days the rule is do everything all at once because you try to build a social media following, which for a elder millennial like me is not as second nature. So I had to put my face on the camera and film myself baking all the time. It was nicer when other people were filming me baking. I just kind of let go of my filter and just started posting things. Started a Substack newsletter so that I could really reach the audience that was tuning in for the show, and started with family and friends, but grew and grew. I had a pretty good network of media here in Chicago. That's actually how me and the 2 other contestants, Sarah and Nirali, who were on the baking show with me, it's how we got a lot of local press. Is I reached out to a lot of my contacts and they did too, and we got a really good network of press. And then a few months later, I followed up with all of them and said, "Hey, can I come on WBEZ, the local NPR station, to talk about baking?" To the Chicago Tribune, I said, "Hey, can I, write some recipes for you? Here are a couple of ideas." And that's how that started to roll out. I worked my network. It turns out that one of the editors at Food and Wine lives 3 or 4 blocks from me. And I pitched her and said, "Hey, we shop at the same grocery store. I heard you on another podcast. Can I write for you guys?"
Oh, that's good that you said that you heard it on a podcast and it wasn't that you were just stalking her.
Yeah. And so started writing for Food and Wine because I really wanted to, social media for me is like, it's fun at times, but it's tough. So I also wanted to, and I love writing. So I really wanted to see if I could get some, writing chops and some bylines down, which could help make a publisher more interested in me, say, oh, he's had other editors that he's worked with and he knows how to write succinctly, or at least tries to, and how to write a good recipe that people respond to. So that was, I really loved the work, but it was fun I tried to not put all my eggs in one basket, say social media or a newsletter. I tried to do a little bit of everything in a way that made sense without totally burning myself out.
So the show films in the fall and then it's however many months. So you have this like ramp up where it's going to be coming out, but you can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I never even really thought about that. So you're building things so when the show does come out, there you are, you have a newsletter, you're working on your platform, so it's there. You're not scrambling to build it because suddenly the show is out and people are wondering who you are.
Exactly. I sort of prepped it up with, I first really focused on the book proposal because I said, if I get anything out of this would be the thing I want to do. So I worked on that first. And then as we got closer, we also didn't know the exact date when it would come out. They said sometime in 2023. And we're like, okay.
Wow.
Then, as soon as it came out, I started the newsletter and ramped up my social media a little bit. So that's how that went. Because I was like, I don't know when this is going to happen, have other work and things to do. So it wasn't so simple, but you just kind of got to roll with it.
How important was the show for you? Would you do it over again that way?
It's a great question. Going into the show, the big thing it gave me was some confidence. I didn't think I never started a food blog or I posted pictures of what I baked on social media, but more for friends to look at because I didn't know if I had anything to say or if people really would actually respond to my style of baking. And it turns out they did. Turns out I'm like a big nerd. And all of my fellow contestants were like, oh, Martin's a big nerd about this stuff. I mean, we all were in the grand scheme of things. But, when Paul Hollywood says you're very organized and you really know what you're doing, you're like, oh, okay, cool. But then being on the show itself, the Great British Baking Show is like super, super popular. But the American version, the season I was on, had just got picked up by the Roku channel. People who knew about it loved it, but it was still not nearly as popular as the British version that like everyone I know watches. So many people I know don't even know there is an American version still. I tell people it didn't open any doors for me. The door cracked open and I like shoved my foot in because, you have some accolades. You have somebody that says, hey, I was on this show. People recognize me. They recognize the brand of the baking show with Paul Hollywood and Prue Leith. So that lights some people up and they get excited and they go watch and then they follow me. So it really just kind of cracked the door open, but it most of all built my confidence. I was re-listening to the episode you did with Heddle, who was on MasterChef. And I was really interested and wanted to make sure I mentioned that the baking show is actually very nice. Like, it's not like a mean reality show. They take good care of us. There are no secrets. What you see on that show, it's exactly what you get.
They're not starving you in a hotel room somewhere.
And they're like the crew, the crew is so nice. They really take care of you. Like, they joke with you. Like, they hug you when you're done. A couple of the crew during the finale were like crying. It was the most wonderful experience. And I have 8 other, great baking friends out of it who we still meet every year for an annual reunion. So and that camaraderie also kind of bolstered me because after the show, we were all like, hey, what do you want to do with this experience? And I told people what I wanted to do. And everybody was like, hey, we're here to support you however we can. So that really goes a long way when you have, a bunch of friends saying you can do this.
Absolutely. And not to mention the, boots on the ground media training that you get from having to cook in front of a bunch of cameras. You go through that and you're like, yeah, I can do a local TV segment. No problem. I can get on national, public media. No problem. Really does kind of bolster your understanding of how the business works.
Let's talk about that proposal. So how much did the proposal change with Sally? And then how much did the book match the proposal?
So Sally really, in all her genius, really wanted to beef up the marketing piece of it and also actually play down my experience baking on TV. She said, this proposal is good enough. That's a great thing about you, but you shouldn't necessarily let that drive the proposal. So I really made that a little bit more in the backseat and then beefed up my marketing piece of it with real specifics, like on my book tour, like which bookstore am I going to go to in all these places? And I have a lot of relationships with folks, especially here in the Midwest. So I was like, oh, I'll put the names of the people I know in there so that they know I'm not just making this up. That was the most that we worked with. I think changed a couple of the comps that Sally thought, oh, this book didn't sell as well as you thought, or this book sold better, or actually, I think your voice is more similar to this other author. That's another great thing that Sally was great at, is she reflected back at me like, I think this is your brand, or this is where you fit among baking writers. Like, you're not quite Nicola Lamb, experiment on everything. You put a little bit of that science into your baking. So you're not quite somebody who just throws together really simple recipes. So you fit somewhere in there. You're like the gay, nerdy baker next door kind of type. So it's fun for her to say, does that resonate with you? And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Works for me, Sally. So it's helpful to have somebody else say, actually, this is the vibe I get from you, or this is what I think you should play up. So that's what we changed more, but not a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And then we did work with Frances Baca to design the proposal. She was incredible. She gave me the first draft and I'm like, I have no notes. You fully get what my proposal's about. That helped me see, especially how my recipes could look in a more laid out format. And as an author, again, with a smaller platform, I think it helped me look more like, hey, I'm really serious about this. Yeah. So she didn't, Sally didn't tell me I had to do that, but I think it'd be a good practice too, for me to see something in layout and give somebody feedback on design before I do it with like a whole huge book. And I did a lot of investing in what I called my startup costs. My background's in economic development. Businesses have startup costs. It's my first couple of years in a new career. So I actually put some money into that and into building my platform. I worked with a PR firm a little bit after the show, and I put together a press kit, which this was really helpful. I actually think Molly helped me edit a few of my recipes because I wanted eyes on the recipes to say, do I know what I'm doing here? So I had 10 recipes that I put together. And then I worked with a friend who named Grant Kessler, who's a local food photographer. And we did one day shoot of 10 recipes, which that was a learning experience on how photo shoots go. And then we used those to pitch stories to outlets, which was helpful. And I'm really glad I did that, especially before the photo shoot on the book.
Yeah. Well, that's really smart. I don't think we framed it this way on the show of having startup costs pivoting into this completely new field. I feel like a lot of times we think we will just make it happen somehow, but we're not thinking, actually, no, this is the startup cost. This is what I hope the returns will be, but there's going to have to be some money that goes into this or some time or both.
Both.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of both.
A lot of both, actually.
Sometimes I feel like we are just supposed to be preordained to be cookbook authors, that somebody is going to come around and just pick us and say, oh, you know what? You have a great story to tell. I love your food. You should write a book and let me open, the magic golden door and you're going to walk through it. And you're just like, no, it doesn't happen that way.
Absolutely not. Like, at least for me, I had to do a lot of work on that startup cost. I pitched stories to I don't know how many outlets before anybody bit on any of them, but then that started to grow. I also did a lot of, I don't like to use the word networking, relationship building. As somebody who used to, run a chamber of commerce here in Chicago, I know the value of it. And it was really fun, especially in the food world, because people are nice. You have things to talk about, like networking with you all.
There's cake.
There's cake. But yeah, networking with folks through Substack, through social media. And those folks have then kind of kept, have been alongside me as I'm writing the book, which has been fabulous.
I'm curious with selling the book, like how did that go?
We mostly got no's.
And how is dealing with that?
I just knew I would deal with that. Like I didn't have a big ego thinking I would get a big book deal. I wanted a quality publisher to work with. And if there was no deal at all, I was kind of resigned to that was a possibility. I may need to spend a couple more years working on my platform. But Sally has had a long relationship with Doug and the team of Agate. And when they said yes, and, I can drive to their office in 20 minutes, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I'm a big supporter of supporting small businesses and local folks. They said yes. And I'm like, we can keep looking, but I'm really happy with meeting with their team. I'd always love a bigger contract, but I said, you have to start somewhere. And I really just felt like having a great publisher in my backyard was an awesome way to start. They have really beautiful books, and we're really going to devote a lot of time and effort into my book. That really sold me. And plus, getting to know the whole team and getting able to sit down with them is a big plus in my book.
Yeah.
Because you can, talk right to the source.
That's great. It's like a deal's a deal.
Yeah, and they'd published several books I had read. Lana Reagan, local chef, and a couple local cookbooks from the Green City Market and Who's Your Mama Pie, books that I have. I said, oh, okay, yeah, I've read those books. They look really high quality and they're wonderful books. So it made me feel really confident about working with their team and happy to have them as my first home for a cookbook. And talking to a few other authors, I talked to Louisa Weiss at an event here in Chicago, and she said, there's a benefit for working with a small publisher and the things that they might let you do or some flexibility you might have compared with working with a different publisher. Yeah.
And the relationship, too. I mean, it feels like you really are developing a relationship or have developed a relationship with them, and you're not so, oh my God, I'm so lucky I got picked by this big five,
Right. And there is that risk of getting lost in the shuffle with a different publisher that maybe produces a ton of books, especially when it's your debut. You do want to be a lead.
Especially when it comes to marketing, which we'll get to.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to talk a little bit about the title of your book, because you are really focused on, Great Bakes, but there's also the Great Lakes kind of angle. Has that always been the title? And is that also part of the marketing strategy, focusing on the Great Lakes region?
That's the working title is Great Bakes, because I was like, this resonates with me. It rhymes with Great Lakes. It hints to the Great American Baking Show. It just kind of works. And I'm surprised there isn't a book with that name.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm not always so forthright with it, but that's the working title of it. I am a Midwestern through and through, and somebody who came to being proud of that in sort of a roundabout way. I really wanted this book to reflect sort of some modern Midwestern comfort baking. And that's really the focus of it. One person once told me, oh, Midwestern, that's so niche. And I said, come if I call it niche. I know where you're from, and okay, I get that. But it's that the produce that we have here, my kind of background, really enjoying like simple, fresh flavors and farm to table gets overused, but we are the Midwest. Like I grew up buying produce from like a roadside stand where you just put money into a box.
Your love of corn.
It's kind of that vibe. My love of corn, my love of, I lived up in Traverse City one summer, where like most of the tart cherries are grown. So I have like a deep love for them. And I go visit my grain farmer an hour south of Chicago some days. They let me ride on their combine when they harvested corn. So it gives this kind of vibe, but also in this era of kind of flavor maxing everything. I'm pretty of a simple baker. Like I like kind of simple, straightforward flavors with a twist. But that kind of gives me this sense of like Midwestern simplicity and niceness that I hope my book is imbued with.
Yeah. You find your audience and they can stay loyal. I mean, I worked on Paul Verant's book. It came out in 2012. I think that book sells more copies now than it did, say, 7-8 years ago. It's so funny. So I think people just get loyal to a book sometimes. And it really is a Midwestern sort of preserving book.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something, Martin, that you said before. We were talking about recipes. And at the top, you were talking about you love developing recipes, coming up with your own recipes. And so, because clearly that's a part of being a cookbook author, is developing original recipes. And, a lot of people love to bake. That's they just love to bake other people's recipes. So is this something you've always done? What are your inspirations? And then how did you learn how to write recipes? Because developing them, writing them are two separate things.
Absolutely. So I always cooked. I've always been a person who cooked. I was not a very good baker for a long time because I didn't really like to follow the recipes. With cooking, I'd be like, okay, those are the ingredients. I'll figure it out. And then at one point I said, I bet if I actually measure things and follow the recipe, I can bake. And turns out, yes, if you really follow the recipe and measure the ingredients properly with a scale, you can bake. So I started to do that and I used other people's recipes. Jim Leahy's My Bread was like the first book I baked out of and had a lot of success because bread is, for me, the easiest thing to start with because if you mess up, it's flour, water, salt, and yeast, and you're not out butter and chocolate and eggs and all that stuff. I would make recipes from books and I would like either write it down and then write some notes either in the book, or I started to maybe around like 2015 or 2016 actually write down notes, and then I would change the recipes a little bit, or I would triangulate recipes where I'd look at 2 or 3 and I would say, okay, I'm going to take this part from this one and this part from this one and this part from the other one, and I would make it and I would bake the bread and then sit down and type notes. And that became fun for me to actually sit down and say, okay, how do I explain this in words? I've read a ton of cookbooks and I was an English major for undergrad, so I have written things. And it became a fun writing exercise to say, how do I describe this process that I really enjoy in words? How can I make like a good, efficient sentence? How can I describe it the most accurately for somebody who might not know the jargon? If I say fold in, well, they know what fold in means. With baking bread, there's specific terms that if you bake bread, like you say, stretch and fold the dough. Well, you have to explain that to somebody the first time. So it was a fun challenge for me. And so I enjoyed like 2 or 3 times a week, I'd bake something. If it was good, my husband would usually say, write that down. And I would sit down on my laptop and just type away and write the recipe down and take some notes. And it just kind of spiraled from there. So I had a lot of recipes written down that I didn't share anywhere. I just had for my loaf of whole wheat bread that I make twice a week was just in there and I would make it. And it was my recipe, but I know the heritage of it. It came from like this person's idea and this person's idea, and I mashed them together. And I was reading B. Wilson's book, The Secrets of Cooking, which I just adore that book. Right. And she cites a lot of her sources in there. So as I was putting my book together, I kind of took that on to say, hey, I'm not copying this person's recipe, but I do want to honor that, like, hey, this came from a technique from this author or this author. Like Nicola Lamb, I took something from one of her recipes. It's totally not her recipe, but there's one technique in it that I said, this works so well that I have to use it in this recipe.
And I bet that would make her so happy to hear, because her book is so technique driven.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's only so many ways to combine flour and water and yeast to make bread, or butter and flour to make pie crust, that it's a new recipe. My technique might be a little different, but it's not like earth shattering.
I mean, we've never done this before on the show, having somebody on who has finished the manuscript, but the book is not out yet. All the part of making a book is fresh in your head. Because a lot of times, like we talk to somebody and maybe they've kind of forgotten some of the pain points. I mean, for you, like what were some of like the biggest surprises in this process?
I learned a lot about the order in which I should do things. I think next time I will definitely, like, as soon as I feel like a recipe is done, I will send it out to test immediately. Some recipes I did that with were a little trickier. Then some recipes I held off and I did a big batch of recipe testing with folks. I would just do it like recipe done, like somebody go test it, so that at the end, I'm not trying to wrangle my testers. I was lucky that I have 8 folks who I know are good bakers, so I could send them a recipe to test first and they would give me really thorough notes. Folks I was on the baking show with. So that was really helpful, and I'll definitely use that again. Stacy Nakamoto, who I was on the show with, was like my chief recipe tester. And if I was like, oh, something's not working here, I would send it to her and she would give me notes, because she's also a biochemist, which helps because she's really nerdy. She also has kids, so she's really busy, and she can tell me like, hey, just like use the whole block of cream cheese. Don't use 3/4 of it. It just up the amount in there and makes more, and that's fine. So she was a great sounding board for a lot of those notes. Yeah, I learned a lot about especially the photography, like how to prepare as much as you can ahead of time. Doing that one-day shoot with Grant when I was working on my press kit, I learned I cannot shoot 80 recipes in one session. I would not survive that. So when I talked with my photographer, Kevin Miyazaki, said, can we break this up into 2 4-day shoots? Because I didn't want them all in the winter. I wanted something in the summer with produce and things. But I said, I don't have a budget to have a whole team come and cook. I'm baking all the things you see, so I need to break it up. And then I also brought in Kara Stucker, who was another fellow contestant on the baking show. She stayed at my house and was my assistant and organizer and co-baker and cleaner upper. She actually kept me organized. She wrote a list on my to-do list every day.
Oh, nice.
She was also really interested in the styling and the photography piece of things. So she got to learn from Molly Hayward, my amazing food and prop stylist, and Kevin, and helped me bake. So I learned like, oh, there's no way I could have done that without at least one other hand in the kitchen. Yeah, I think those are the big ones. I really did enjoy writing it.
Yeah.
Even near the end, like it was exciting to see things come together. Yeah. And the other pain point was when you have a vision for a recipe that just doesn't turn out, is at some point you like, don't test it 10 times, like after like 5, step away from it and maybe come back to it, or say like, oh, maybe something else needs to take this recipe's place.
Right. Because you have deadlines. I can't just spend the next, few weeks trying to solve this one recipe when I have these other ones that need my attention.
Yeah. I had a few visions where I'm like, I want this recipe to work. And at times like my husband would be like, it's not there. And he's a critic sometimes, where he's like, nope. And I'm like, you're right. This is not good enough.
It's good to have that person in your life.
Yeah. He coached me through prepping for the baking show, so he knows how to give constructive feedback.
Nice.
Right. How long did you have to turn in the manuscript?
So we signed our contract last summer. I want to say last May, and then it was due on May 1st this year. So about a year, I think a little less than a year. It's also funny because right as I signed the contract is when I got a bunch of other freelance writing gigs, which is great.
Of course.
But I'm like, fun timing.
Yeah.
So my attention was divided.
And you're definitely in that place where you're not going to want to say no.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. When Food and Wine's like, here, write 5 articles for us in the next month. I'm like, yes.
Were the photos also part of that deadline? You had to have the photos and the manuscript turned in at the same time?
Yes. And they initially asked for all the photos in the manuscript at the same time. The good thing about Agate is they said to me, you only need photos for half of the recipes because we know how expensive it is. After getting quotes and talking with Kevin, the photographer, and Molly, the stylist, I decided, if I never write another book, let's do photos for the whole book.
Oh, wow.
So I did, whether that was silly or not, decided to do that. I asked them, because my book is due in May, I'll turn in half of the photos with my manuscript, but I want some summer photos. It was May when I got the contract, so I don't have time to take photos this summer. I want some gorgeous Midwestern produce, and some of the recipes too need some of that. So I wanted to wait for that. So I said, can I turn in half in August or September? And they agreed to that, which was great.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Where are you now in the process?
So I submitted my manuscript. I'm waiting to get the production schedule and any edits back.
Had your editor seen like a halfway point of the manuscript?
I sent her a few recipes just to make sure I'm like, this isn't too off base. So I sent like a short recipe and a long recipe. So what do you think? Said, I like it, but I don't have time to give you like thorough notes. So I said, all right, I'm just going to keep going. And I definitely overwrote. My manuscript is long, but I thought if I have to cut big chunks out, I can use them for something else. I can save them. I know that will have to be edited a lot. Hopefully the recipe's not as much because I've spent a lot of time with those, but definitely the front matter and some of the little essays in there will need some work. So yeah, I'm kind of in this holding pattern. I want to get other projects and other things in the work, so I'm waiting to hear. So that's one of the questions I had for you guys was, okay, I'm in this weird waiting space, but I want to keep busy with other things. I sent my editor kind of my vacation schedule and other projects I have going so that they can work around that. But like, how do I plan my life?
And they laugh.
Yeah. Well, Kristin, you've just kind of finished up a bunch of edits. What do you think?
I definitely would start potentially like dreaming about like what you hope the splash is like come fall,
okay.
And just start thinking about the kind of press you would love for the book to receive, whether that's stories that you write, stories about you. Because the other thing is some publications will shoot a year in advance. So,
yeah.
Let's say you wanted to do like a bunch of Thanksgiving pie stories in 2026. Are there publications that actually would be planning those in 2025?
Yeah.
So could you just start putting out those kinds of feelers?
Even getting addresses of people you want to send advance copies to, who can put your book in their newsletter or whatever feed they're using.
In terms of the schedule, I'm laughing. If I sent my vacation schedule to my editor, they'd be like, okay, like,
we don't care.
They don't care. Because I can't tell you how many times something has landed on the doorstep or, in my inbox the day before I'm going on vacation, that type of thing. So I'm not saying that's going to happen to you, and it may not happen to you, but, those things do happen. And, it's so hard to know because you don't know when you're going to get your edits back. You don't know how extensive they're going to be. So there's nothing to do except, wait and try to build some flexibility into, my sense is that if they come back to you and the edits are extensive, they won't give you a 4-day turnaround,
Yeah.
Like you're not going to be an expert your first time when you get the edits back. Right. For me, and this might not happen to you, I got the edits back for the first manuscript I worked on, and there was so much red all over the page. It was just like track changes had like a massacre. And I just was like, oh, but like I got A's in English class. Like I can write. And it was just, I didn't know how to I learned so much about the craft of recipe writing through an amazing copy editor who edited that book. And it was kind of like, I felt like I was getting a master's in cookbook writing by going through that process. And similar to you, at the time, that first book was with 10 Speed Press, and 10 Speed was an independent local press. I had been to their office. It was one of these kind of, it felt like a very comfortable relationship. It felt like grad school for cookbooks. I'm so glad I had that experience.
Yeah, I'm excited to work. I like working with editors. I like somebody to read my work and mark it up and tell me how to, there's some portions where I know that needs fixing or reorganizing, but I've worked with some great editors that, when you work with a great editor and you're like, oh, you appreciate my writing, you're just trying to make it better. And those notes are so thoughtful, and they also highlight what they like. And so they're like, do more of this and less of that. So I'm really excited.
Back to the schedule, if it does land and they ask for a timeline that's shorter than you feel that you can always ask.
Yeah. And what's the other thing I'm nervous about is I've written a lot of short articles, which is like totally doable. But how do I tackle like dealing with edits for like, I have 100,000 words in my manuscript.
Oh, wow.
So it's very long.
It is long. Wow.
Even if I had half that, I would still think it's a beast. Like, how do you tackle edits for something that just seems so big?
One word at a time.
Yeah. This has happened to me. I did turn in a manuscript that was way too long. I thought, oh, the editor is going to tell me like the places that need to be trimmed. No, she sent the whole thing back to me, cut out 20,000 words, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, that happened to me on my first book too.
I might get that.
Yeah.
And that was fine because the beauty of this editing, the beauty of a long editing schedule, which all books go through some sort of schedule this way, is that you've had enough distance away from the work that when you see it again, you're thinking, oh, I know now what, like your brain has been doing work without you knowing. You'll see it again with fresh eyes and think, I do not need that essay there. I'm going to save that for my Substack. It'll just be more clear because you've had some distance from it. And I don't think that's possible without the time.
That's always hard, but in a way, there's something very liberating about just taking things out and saving them for something else, you know?
You could even do something as simple as, print out the entire thing and then just stack the pieces of paper into the various chapters and see if there's one chapter that's just really thick. If you like visuals, instead of just looking at this like Word document, that can just kind of trick your brain thinking, oh, now I realize that the pie chapter just needs to be, trimmed.
I'm sure you can't cut the pie chapter.
I know. You can. That's another thing, just to trick your brain. Or you could go through with highlighters if you really need the visuals on there and say, okay, when am I talking about technique? When am I talking about story? When am I losing my attention? Like you could you could just highlight a piece of just like an essay and go, oh, now I realize what's important about this essay or what can go. I mean, there's ways like to just trick your brain to make it seem like you're looking at it for the first time.
That's a great way to think about it because I'm definitely going to need to do that.
And also reading chapters backwards, like starting with the recipes from the back to the front is a way to do it. And reading the whole book backwards, starting with the chapters and going forward. And if, depending on your relationship with your editor's schedule, if it's not gotten into line edit or even pretty rigorous developmental edit, do they have time for a conversation about it? And if they're not available for that, Sally might be available for that.
I have a question for all of you. Do you find that you reread the parts that you wrote first and tweak them over and over again, and then the stuff you kind of write at the end, it just goes so much faster and you don't tweak it that much, but it actually might be better? Does that ever happen?
I don't think I've ever written a cookbook linearly.
Yeah, that's true.
So I couldn't even tell you what I wrote first versus last, to tell the truth, because I'm always just picking pieces.
Good point.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a process, when you're writing a big project like a book, there's a point where you finally understand the voice of the book. And maybe the stuff you read earlier, you're trying to like change it to catch up to that.
That makes sense.
Then you kind of, and maybe that's why a lot of times like I'll write the introduction last, because I'm not like the introduction kind of like it's still gelling. Did you write the introduction last, Martin, or did you write it first? Or
there's some chunks from my proposal that I wrote first, but then I wrote all of the introduction and front matter at the end. I'd kept like little, I call them sketches, where I'm like, I know I want to write about this thing, like why you need to use a scale. I had like a little saved document of like, here's this, and a few other little tidbits and stories. So I kind of assembled those, but I wrote most of the front matter all at the end, because after I knew all the tools I used, what ingredients I used, some techniques in the recipes, and what stories might be reflected in those. So I wrote all that at the end, which I felt like was flowing pretty well. I was dreading writing that, and then I really enjoyed the process of writing it. Again, there might be too much in there, but I felt like at points my voice was really strong, so much so that then I went back to some recipes where I'm like, oh, that head note is dull.
Nice.
To try to zhuzh them up, and I am already thinking of a few recipes that I need to go do that too as we're talking.
But that is, I think the distance is such a good thing to have it go away and then come back.
You know, we're talking about what to do once you finally get these pages, but you were also asking about the downtime, because there is so much hurry up and wait in publishing a lot of times. I'm curious what Kate and Molly think Martin should be doing during these like down periods, because there will be several.
what's so great is that you already have your newsletter. And it seems that newsletters really can help sell books more than social media, and publishers are really paying attention to that. So I feel like since you're so fortunate to already have a subscriber base to keep building, and you have a year to keep building it. So that's where I think I would put, if you're trying to figure out where you should spend the most time, I feel like it makes the most time to spend on the newsletter, and then think of social media as like almost like an advertisement, because there's only so many hours in the day. And the most important thing is you really want a great book out there. So where should you spend your resources? It seems that newsletter and, what you're doing with pitching, all that's great, because you're creating this like network of people who are already expecting your book. And that's the biggest thing you can do.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
And your byline, if you're pitching and you're getting assignments now, your byline is going to say author of the upcoming book. And I mean, that's not nothing.
Yeah, that's great. What I've been trying to use is the network to both of folks that I'm trying to pitch to and publish to, but also The kind of newsletter community, whether you're on Substack or something else, has been really great. That's how I've connected with other authors. I think you had Hetty McKinnon on a while ago, and I saw her at the IACP Awards, and she knew my name. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know my name. She's like, yeah, you're on Substack. I'm like, oh, wow.
Wow, that's great.
That is just a reminder that I need to give my newsletter a little love. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So I definitely have an idea for my second book that I'm like, this book needs to be written and I'm the one who's going to write it.
Yeah.
How have you guys dealt with like the cadence of working on other books?
It's never too soon.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But if we're talking about downtime and things to do with it, and you have a book idea, I would work on my proposal like...
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because you have so much fresh learning about what it went into it, and that could actually work out really nicely if it lined up, but if you were able to put some time into it. But yes, of course, talk to Sally.
She knows already.
No, and keep those ideas, because you might think that you won't forget those ideas, but just keep, a lot of times I know with different types of writing, if you're coming out with a novel, but you have another, the best thing you can do is write another novel, because then when the other one comes out, what else do you have? Yep. So it's good to have that in the works. It's hard to sell a second book before the first ones come out, because they want to know how well the first one's going to do before they, want to sign a second. But that doesn't mean that you can't start putting it down, getting those ideas in place, maybe even testing the waters of talking to some bookstore owners and saying, hey, like, what do you see?
I've already tested the waters and talked to a few other authors who know the world. I'm like, what do you think about this? Yeah. And they're like, oh, you should write that book. And I'm like, okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
Go where the excitement is.
One of the things I love speaking with you, Martin, is that you had, the process was hard, but you came out of it wanting to do more of it. So
yeah, totally.
I've come out of it been like, I need a break, that sort of thing. So
after the photo shoot, I was like, I need a week to like lay down.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is important to kind of lay out there, and I've told some people who've asked me this, is like, I'm also in a place financially where like, I'm not making money on this book right now. I worked in another career for 15 years. I have a husband who has a good job that I can actually like take this time to have a startup business where the money coming in isn't where I would like it to be. And I think that's important to tell people, because, if I was 25, I couldn't have done this. I would not have had the resources to keep a roof over my head while I was working on this project that I was so excited about. Sometimes the math, even the freelancing gigs, like the rates haven't changed in a long time, and they're asking you to do more with less. So it's a challenge in that way, but I'm lucky where I can give myself some time in between some other paid work that I have to work on this stuff. Sally calls it a big, beautiful business card sometimes. And I let folks know, like, you have to think about that if you really need it to bring in money to earn a living.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because it is something that we should probably talk about more on this podcast. We're talking about cookbook writing, but the financial realities of it it's not how I make my primary income. It's something I think JJ Good called lumpy income, where it comes in like, you get paid and then maybe nothing for like 6, 8, 12 months. And something that if people really do want to get into cookbook writing and they need to also be generating an income, that's when you do more baby steps. Maybe it's like assisting on your friend's photo shoot, so it's, and seeing what it's like. Maybe there are other roles in the cookbook. I got into it through co-authoring. It wasn't my books, but I was getting paid a rate to write those books, and I could juggle that with other work. So I think that is true. It's not a lucrative business for most of us.
Nope. Unfortunately, it's not. It's tough, but I looked at, would I regret I left my old job a while ago for various reasons, but I'd said, what would I regret more, like not trying to write a cookbook or like staying in this job that I don't love and taking some time to do that? And I said, 10 years from now, I would definitely have regretted not doing the book even if it meant, a hit to my income.
Yeah.
We love watching your progression and just super excited to see the book move to the next level.
I could not have done it without the resource that you guys put out there. It's no joke, no exaggeration. Thank you guys for really saving and making this book come to life.
What are you most excited about seeing this book come out in the world?
I think connecting with other people around the book. I'm excited to go on a book tour and meet people and talk with them about my recipes and how I think about baking and answering their baking questions and talking through some of the recipes. So I really love to be in person or on social media or in a newsletter talking with folks, particularly about those recipes or helping them bake or even just discussing, why we love the Midwest so much.
I was going to say that. The whole Great Lakes thing, it's just, you're like an ambassador for it. It's wonderful.
It's a great part of the world that I don't think we all love it, but I think sometimes in the maybe coastal biased publishing world, it doesn't get quite the love that maybe it should. Yet the people are wonderful. And I'm, everywhere I go, people are like, oh, when your book comes out, will you come here and talk? And I'm like, I will come wherever. If you can bring a dozen people, I will be there.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's what I'm most excited about.
Well, Martin, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us. And we will be watching and cheering you on.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to today's show. If you have a question, a comment, or a guest suggestion, contact us at everythingcookbooks.com. We rely on listener support, and here are ways to help. Subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a review. Order books mentioned on the show through our affiliate page at bookshop.org. You can shop our teas, sweatshirts, and other great merch, or just buy us a round of coffee. Reach out about advertising on the show or becoming a sponsor. Thank you to our editor, Abby Circatella. Till next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.